That gut punch of a phone call ripped through the dead silence of my study like a blast of a shotgun. But let me tell you, the real kick to the teeth was the Atlantic Ocean wind slamming against the seawall. That sound, a constant, brutal thud, it was the damn heartbeat of this whole little town on the coast of Maine, looking out over the islands near Portland. My name's Victoria Vic Ross. People used to call me the Iron Lady back in the day, mostly because I was the first female four-star general in the U.S. military. I'd earned every one of those 4 golden stars that used to sit on my shoulder, but now I live alone in a clifftop house overlooking that rough water, keeping the world at arm's length. But even out here, my day still starts at 4:30 a.m. like clockwork, the same way it did when I was commanding every active duty service member in the whole damn country. It's still pitch dark, the harbor swallowed by the night, as I march for an hour along the coastline. You wouldn't call it a walk. It's more like a forced night movement in full battle rattle, a nonstop surge of pure aggression. When I get back to my study, I slam down a mug of black coffee, so strong it could raise the dead. It's what keeps the whole Victoria Ross machine running, that steel-hard discipline I forged over a lifetime. There's only one thing in this icy world that held a flicker of real warmth for me. My granddaughter, Samantha Sam Baker. She was raised staring at those 4 golden stars on my uniform. And wouldn't you know it, she chose the hardest, dirtiest path there is. Her motto, once a volunteer, always an elite. She signed up for the Marine Raider Regiment, the best of the best in the whole United States Marine Corps, and not just any part, but the Special Reconnaissance Course, the one so tough they say only those with a death wish even bother applying. Sam is my brightest pride and, at the same time, the source of a sickening, deep-seated worry. I built that giant fortress of the military, and I know better than anyone how easily it can turn into a brutal prison for those inside it. I know the organization's light and its darkness, right down to the bone. That afternoon, I just wrapped up a video conference in my study with a bunch of retired 3-star generals, debating national security. The tension had finally drained away, leaving a peaceful silence. And then it hit. Whirring, whirring, whirring. The phone's screech was a violent assault, swallowing every other sound in the house. The screen showed a strange number, a local exchange from a general hospital in Boston, Massachusetts. I didn't have a premonition, but my heart just dropped like a stone into a well of ice water. My fingers went cold, the blood draining from my hands. I pressed the answer button with a shaky thumb. Hello. My own voice sounded hollow a long way away. Are you the guardian for Sergeant Samantha Baker of the Marine Corps? The man's voice on the other end was flat, totally emotionless, the word guardian stabbing into my eardrum and deep into my brain. I licked my dry lips and told him I was her grandmother. He identified himself as the chief of emergency services at the Massachusetts General Hospital. Sergeant Baker was rushed to our facility after collapsing during a routine night training exercise, experiencing severe shock symptoms, he explained. She's conscious now, but her condition is still critical. Shock, Sam. A cold fury, like a January gale, settled in my voice. Sam graduated that special recon course, a program famous for pushing humans past their absolute limits. There's no way my granddaughter, with her mind and body of steel, would collapse from just training. The whole world would have to spin backward for that to happen. It isn't just dehydration or exhaustion, the doctor continued, his tone cautious. It appears she was exposed to extreme physical and psychological stress for an extended period. The careful wording of every sentence screamed a warning alarm in my decades of experience. This was not a training accident. After a detailed examination, the doctor paused. That brief silence was enough to set every nerve in my body on edge. We see symptoms of pulmonary edema, fluid in her lungs. I highly recommend you come down here in person to see her condition. Fluid in her lungs. That phrase, those 4 words, were an air raid siren in my head. That's not a symptom of cold or fatigue. It is the undeniable physical signature of drowning, or something damn near it. A clear sign of torture. Understood. I'm coming now. I snapped the phone shut, the click echoing in the quiet study like a judge's gavel dropping the sentence. I didn't even look at the ceremonial uniform with the 4 golden stars stored in the back of my closet. Instead, I grabbed the faded black combat utility uniform I wore when I was still active duty. As I headed to the car, A chilling, ice-cold lethality, past the point of mere anger, radiated from my steps. On the drive toward the hospital, my brain was already spinning up, operating like a high-level war room, planning a full-scale offensive. One line from a short letter Sam sent me a few days ago suddenly popped back into my mind. That one tiny line from Sam's last letter. "Grandma, the waves here are a lot colder than I thought," finally made goddamn sense. It hit me like a sledgehammer why that simple sentence had been eating away at me. This wasn't an accident. This was a declaration of war. And I, Victoria Ross, am a woman who has never, not once in her entire life, backed down from a fight I didn't start. The intensive care unit air was a cold, sharp mix of antiseptic and the heavy scent of mortality. The only thing proving life was still happening in that room was the rhythmic, monotonous beeping of the monitors. Lying there, surrounded by tubes and high-tech equipment, Sam looked impossibly small and broken, like a rose snapped by a hurricane. Her face was hidden behind an oxygen mask, stripped of all color, pale as porcelain. Her lips, usually set with the fierce determination I knew so well, were dry, colorless, and barely trembling. I leaned closer to her thin body and gently brushed her damp hair off her forehead. The faint, fluttering heat under my fingertips felt like the only anchor I had left in the entire world. Then I saw her arms, peeking out from the edge of her hospital gown, and my eyes froze over. They became like a Wyoming glacier, completely devoid of emotion. It wasn't just bruising. There were dark, mottled areas that looked exactly like the shape of someone's fingers where they'd been held down hard. And that wasn't all. Her skin was raw and scraped in countless places, like she'd been dragged violently across sharp gravel or broken shells. These weren't training scars. These were the clear marks of malice, designed to strip a person of their dignity. A silent, molten fury, a rage like Mount St. Helens erupting, began to boil up from the pit of my stomach. But my face didn't move. Behind that mask of ice, my mind was racing. Who, why, and how? Only fools scream and howl on emotion. A true warrior stays perfectly calm and hits the weak spot with absolute precision. Just then, a tiny groan broke the silence, and Sam's eyelids fluttered open. Her unfocused eyes drifted around the sterile room until they finally settled on me. "Grandma." But what spread through her eyes wasn't relief. It was a crippling wave of sheer terror and a shame so deep it was soul-burning. Her eyes darted around like she'd been caught seeing something forbidden. She instantly tried to yank her wounded arm under the sheets, but my grip, steel tight, stopped her. "Show me." My voice was low and cold, like it was echoing from a deep underground cavern. "No, please, don't look." Sam shook her head frantically, tears cutting clean tracks down her painfully pale cheeks. "Who was it?" My voice held no warmth, only the razor-sharp demand for the absolute truth. "Who the hell laid a hand on this body? The body of my only grandchild." Doc, it was training. I just... Stop lying." My voice cut through her weak excuse like a hacksaw. "I raised you. I know your limits better than anyone on this goddamn planet. This wasn't training. This was an assault. Now tell me who did this to you." Under the inescapable spotlight of my gaze, Sam finally broke, starting to sob uncontrollably. Her tiny shoulders shook with a pathetic desperation. Through her heartbroken wails, I understood every single piece of the truth. This wasn't a simple assault. This was a silent war, declared and covered up by the organization itself. I slowly released the wrist I was gripping and instead gently took her hand. I spoke to her in a voice calmer than any I'd ever used in my life. "Sam, snap out of it. You are not weak. You are not inexperienced." I whispered, my voice like warm sunlight melting a frozen heart. "Your commander was a fool, and your senior officer was a sadistic bastard. That's all this is. Look me straight in the eye, and tell me again that this was your fault." My words worked like magic, breaking the spell of guilt and shame on her heart. But that same magic also unleashed the floodgates of the terrifying memories she'd been struggling to suppress. She turned her face away from my gaze, burying it in the blankets. Then, in a voice so faint it was nearly lost, she muttered, I'm sorry. I wasn't good enough." The moment that sentence reached my ears, the last thread of reason holding my sanity snapped, silently but decisively, inside my skull. It was a quiet break, but it felt like the end of the world. Just then, the heavy ICU door groaned open. A man in a crisply starched Marine Corps camouflage uniform walked in. His name tag read Connor. It was her captain, the officer in charge of Sam's company. He spotted me, and for a split second, a look of panic flashed in his eyes, but he quickly hid it, snapping off a slick, rehearsed salute as he approached. "General Ross," he said, the respect in his voice sounding hollow and fake. "I am terribly sorry to have inconvenienced you. On behalf of the command, I sincerely apologize for the lack of oversight that led to this incident with Sergeant Baker." Connor rattled off the apology flawlessly, like reading from a cue card, bowing deeply. But beneath his professional surface, I could see the irritation of a man dealing with an unnecessary mess and the urgency to smooth things over quickly. I didn't answer. I just let my icy stare slowly track from the top of his head to the tips of his highly shined boots. That silence, colder than any insult, spoke volumes of my utter contempt and disrespect for the man standing before me. Under the crushing pressure, sweat beaded on Connor's forehead. "Well, you see, Sergeant Baker is exceptionally talented and highly dedicated," he stammered, hurrying to defend himself. It was her own intensity and fierce commitment that led her to push past her physical limits. While we admit there may have been some excessive methods in our instruction, it was all rooted in the desire to forge her into a world-class operator. And, shut up, it wasn't a yell. It was a single, low, quiet sound, an absolute zero-degree tone that cut through his eardrums and froze his brain instantly. The sheer force of that one word was more than enough to stop the blood in his veins and root him to the spot. "You are Drew Vance." Part 3, The End of the World. The captain in front of me sucked in a sharp breath. "Don't you ever utter the word Marine again with that rotten mouth of yours, you hear me? It makes my skin crawl." I fixed Connor with a look that would turn lava to glass. "Does this look like the result of excessive instruction to you? Because all I see is evidence of a felony, a complete destruction of human dignity." Connor's face drained of color, his composure completely gone. His panic was impossible to hide. "No, General, it's a misunderstanding. It's a part of our Marine Raider tradition." Tradition?" I snorted, the sound cutting through his pride like shattered glass. "Is your tradition forcing female service members to strip down to their underwear, throwing them in an icy harbor, and then letting a pack of men mock and humiliate them? Is that the honor of the United States Marine Corps you swore an oath to defend with your life?" Connor's eyes shook like they were caught in a California earthquake. How could this old woman possibly know that? His mind had clearly shut down. All he could do was stand there, mouth agape. I wasn't going to waste another syllable on this maggot. I quietly pulled my smartphone from my pocket and, with practiced hands, dialed speed dial number 1. After a few rings, a young, strained voice answered from the other side. "Yes, this is General Davies, Chief of Staff of the United States Army. What can I do for you, General Ross?" The voice belonged to the man who currently held the top job in the entire Army. I could sense the undisguised tension in his tone. A general completely unnerved by an unexpected call from the legendary 4-star who came before him. My gaze drifted out the Boston hospital window, over the dark harbor of Massachusetts where the lights of fishing boats flickered like the dying embers of a battlefield. My voice was colder than that night's water as I gave my command. "Davies, get your ass on a Black Hawk helicopter right now and fly it to this Massachusetts General Hospital." That's not a request from a former officer to a junior. It's an absolute, non-negotiable order to a subordinate. "But, General, what in Boston is happening?" I could hear the total confusion in his voice. "No discussion." I cut him off, my words ice. "And you're not enough. You bring the commander of the 10th Mountain Division, the commander of the Marine Raider Regiment, the regimental colonel under them, and the battalion commander here, every single one of the relevant parties. Line up all their heads in front of me." I paused, delivering the final, fatal blow. "You have 1 hour. If you are not here in 60 minutes, you know what happens. Let's decide this tonight. Either the U.S. Army gets torn down by my hand, or you tear out the rotten root yourself." With that, I hung up the phone without another word. In the quiet hospital room, Captain Connor, who was still standing there frozen, must have been hearing the phantom echoes of General Davies screaming into the phone. The declaration of war by the legendary General Ross had sliced through the Massachusetts night, shaking the foundation of the Pentagon and the whole U.S. military. My single phone call turned the entire military command structure on the East Coast into a gigantic, unpredictable tsunami. General Davies, the current chief of staff, instantly knew his entire career, no, the very existence of the U.S. Army, was on the line within that impossibly short time limit. He slammed down the receiver and issued near-hysterical orders to his staff. Those commands, like a chain reaction of warning sirens, rippled from the Pentagon to every military base from Virginia to Maine. The Boston night sky was suddenly filled with the thunderous roar of helicopter rotors, making it sound like a full-blown combat zone. Well before my one-hour deadline, the highest-ranking officers from the Eastern Command began landing on the Massachusetts General Hospital rooftop heliport like summoned ghosts. General Davies, the Chief of Staff of the Army, was first, followed by the division commander, the Raider Regiment commander, the colonel, and finally, the battalion commander who was Sam's direct superior. They were men of varying ranks and decorations, but the look on every single face was identical, the bloodless, white despair of criminals waiting for a divine execution. I finally appeared. I ignored their salutes, my cold gaze lingering on each man's face, passing over them one by one like I was measuring a tombstone. Every time my eyes stopped, the massive, star-studded officers shuddered faintly, paralyzed like rabbits caught by a snake. A fine sight, I muttered, making no attempt to hide my scorn. Now, is there anyone among you who knows exactly what happened to my granddaughter? No one could answer. The only information they'd received was the false report concocted by the ground unit. Accidental injury during training. Their desperate silence was the loudest testament to the rot deep within the heart of this organization. Fine. Then this old woman will confirm the facts myself. I turned my back on them and walked out without hesitation. My steps were taking me straight to the Marine Raider regimental compound. The senior officers following me trudged along like cattle being led to a slaughterhouse. The compound in the middle of the night was brightly lit up, bathed in a strange, tense energy, as if it had been hit by a surprise attack. An emergency alarm had been sounded, and every unit member, dressed in fatigues but unarmed, was lined up in formation on the drill square. When I stepped into their presence, an invisible shockwave went through the troops. The legendary figure, a living piece of the U.S. military's history they'd only seen in textbooks, had walked out of the realm of myth to judge their corrupted reality. My overwhelming presence locked every man in place. I glanced at Captain Connor, who stood at the front of the line, looking vacant, his soul already gone. I ignored him and slowly surveyed the hundreds of troops lined up behind him. Then, in a voice that was quiet but echoed across the entire square, I made my decree. Master Gunnery Sergeant Doyle, step forward. Hundreds of men held their breath. There was a stirring in the center of the formation. The men parted like the Red Sea before Moses. And from the gap, a man stepped out with the purposeful stride of a caged beast being unleashed. He was built like a tank, the word muscular not doing him justice. Old scars crisscrossed his face, and his eyes held a vicious, contemptuous stare that looked down on everything. This was Master Gunnery Sergeant Thomas Doyle, the shadow ruler of this unit, the drill instructor who terrified the troops. He marched up to me, showing not an ounce of fear, but an arrogant, challenging defiance. There was no hint of remorse in his eyes, only the raw hostility of a predator whose territory had been invaded. Master Gunnery Sergeant Doyle, Marine Raider Regiment. Reporting, ma'am. A flicker of mockery was in his voice, daring me. What can an old retired general do? I inspected the man slowly, from head to toe. My gaze was cold, meticulous, like a hawk searching for its prey's vital spot. After a silence that felt like hours, I quietly but decisively threw the charge at him. You. 3 letters. But that one word was a chilling condensation of all the hatred and contempt in the world. Was it you who did that to my granddaughter? I'm asking you, was it you? That question, like the gong for a colossal battle, echoed heavily into the cold Massachusetts night. The hundreds of Marines watched. Doyle didn't flinch. In fact, he twisted his lips into a confident, challenging smirk, clearly enjoying the moment. I am unaware of your meaning, ma'am. But if you are referring to Sergeant Baker, then yes, I was responsible for her training. Doyle did not back down an inch. There was no guilt in his voice. Sergeant Baker was too fragile for the Marine Raider Regiment, General. I used our unit's traditional methods to beat the weakness out of her and forge her into a true warrior. That's all there is to it. Tradition. The word was spat out with absolute disgust. The cold contempt in my voice made Doyle's hard face twitch slightly. You will explain the nature of your so-called tradition right here, right now. Is your tradition to mentally break your subordinates and beat them to the brink of death? I stopped speaking and took a step toward Doyle. The raw pressure emanating from my small, older body was enough to make the giant drill instructor subconsciously shift his weight back. Or, I continued, my voice low and venomous, is your tradition to force a subordinate female Marine to strip down to her underwear in front of hundreds of men, to laugh at and humiliate her exposed body? Is that the real nature of the tradition you've sworn to protect with your precious honor? The word was like a bomb in the silence. A tremor ran through the formation. The faces of the high-ranking officers behind Doyle, including General Davies, went completely white. A shockwave of dismay spread through the troops, and they looked at each other or bowed their heads in shame. Their reaction was silent proof that my words were the undeniable truth. The smug look finally vanished from Doyle's face, but only for a moment. He quickly rearmed himself with an even more twisted, self-righteous logic. There are no men and women on the battlefield. His voice was not a mere defiance. It was the conviction of a fanatic who truly believed his actions were absolute justice. The enemy will not go easy on us because we are women. A weak mind that cannot overcome extreme shame and humiliation cannot protect this country's peace. I gave Sergeant Baker a special test to push her beyond her limits. It was a tough love meant to make her stronger than anyone else. Tough love. Hearing that sickening phrase, I knew that continuing to speak to this man would be a crime against the human language. I took my eyes off Doyle and turned toward the young Marines standing behind him, shaking with fear and guilt. You men. My voice was different now, heavy with profound sorrow. Have your eyes gone blind? Have your hearts turned rotten? You saw clearly what this devil did to one of your fellow female Marines. If there is a single ounce of pride left in the Marine's emblem on your chest, then speak the truth right here, right now, as men and as service members. Tell me the full extent of this man's cruel, disgusting actions. But no one spoke. They were terrified of Doyle's retaliation. Worse, they were trapped by the deeply ingrained, twisted code of this closed society that saw turning in a comrade as the ultimate betrayal. Their faces were twisted with guilt, but their lips remained sealed, their eyes fixed on the asphalt. They chose the most despicable form of complicity, silence. The look of sorrow left my face, replaced by a devastating fury, a raging inferno that would burn everything to ash. I stared at that silent crowd. They stood there, complicit in their goddamn silence, choosing a rotten code of silence over honor. I decided right then I was going to rip that pathetic brotherhood out by the roots. I was going to test just how tough their fragile camaraderie really was. Without even turning my head, I barked the next order at General Davies, who was standing stiffly behind me. Davies, issue a full-blown battle readiness alert for this entire garrison. Every single man gears up, full combat load. They are starting a forced night march to the Plymouth coastline right now. No excuses, no quitters. Then, I pointed a finger at Master Gunnery Sergeant Doyle like a spear. But Doyle, you get a special assignment. Strip off every piece of equipment. You will run the entire course next to me, totally unarmed. My eyes flashed in the dark. You love your traditions, you bastard? I am going to use your own damn traditional methods to break that arrogant, rotten spirit of yours, right down to the marrow. This cold Massachusetts night was just the opening act for the spectacular reckoning you earned. My order ripped through the base. Chaos erupted. Hundreds of men scrambled, rushing back to the drill square in a state of terror and disbelief, slamming on their heavy combat gear. The weight, the 40-plus pounds of pack, rifle, and armor, was not just physical. It was the heavy, crushing weight of their collective guilt. At the center of that hell, two figures stood ready, the lightly dressed Doyle, and me, 77 years old, standing taller and straighter than any young Marine there. Move out. My short command threw open the gates of their personal hell. The heavy, rhythmic thump of hundreds of boots on asphalt sounded like a drumbeat of doom, echoing into the night. This was a 25-mile round trip. This was no simple march. It was a cruel, calculated ritual designed to burn every ounce of Sam's despair and pain into the bodies of her attackers and the men who stood by and watched. I led the column at a pace that perfectly matched the most fit Marine, my breathing perfectly even. I listened to their ragged gasps and groaned curses. Every now and then, I would shoot a sentence back at them like a whip crack. What is the matter? The best of the Marine Raider Regiment is ready to quit already? My granddaughter endured this freezing cold naked in your company. The suffering you are feeling right now is nothing compared to the shame she lived through. Every word was a lash, digging into their backs, clawing at their deep-seated guilt. The dual agony of pure exhaustion and mental condemnation dragged their feet down like lead. But the real, agonizing torture was reserved for Doyle. Running beside me, I spoke low enough for only him to hear, a voice that froze the blood in his bones. What happened, drill instructor? Did your legendary stamina run out already? This is just the beginning. The way you stripped my granddaughter of her pride and dignity piece by piece. I am going to crush your arrogant spirit until there is nothing left. Everything you have built, everything you believe in, I will turn to ash before sunrise, using your own damn traditions against you. His suffering was intense, his breathing ragged, his face gray with what looked like death. The terror he had inflicted was now rebounding on him tenfold. The physical agony was slowly, surely scraping away at his massive pride like a dull spear. After what felt like a lifetime, the eastern sky began to lighten. Men were dropping like flies, collapsing on the roadside. The arrogance of the elite was gone, replaced by miserable, clinging despair. When we finally reached the Plymouth coastline, only I, Doyle, and a handful of senior officers were still standing upright. The rest were scattered across the sand like defeated refugees, gasping for air. My breathing was still perfect. I stood there, illuminated by the rising sun, quietly watching the cold gleam of the Atlantic Ocean. My profile, silhouetted against the dawn, was grim and terrifying, like an ancient goddess of vengeance. I slowly turned to Doyle, who was hunched over, panting like a sick dog, his hands on his knees. Then I delivered the final, crushing command in a voice like frozen steel. "Get in the water." "Ma'am," he stammered, his mind too numb with exhaustion and shame to grasp the order. "Are you deaf? I am asking you to get in the water." I was completely devoid of emotion. The frigid ocean will cleanse that dirty, rotten soul of yours a bit. Now get in. It was the exact, sadistic command he had given Sam days earlier. This was the final, devastating blow to his pride, designed to break his last shred of human dignity. His face twisted with rage, humiliation, and, for the very first time, pure terror. He knew he had no choice. His massive body shambled to its feet, like a broken puppet. He stumbled toward the razor-cold water. The freezing waves washed over his ankles, then his calves, and finally his knees. His muscles screamed and seized up. His jaw began to rattle against his will. I watched him, completely emotionless. There was no joy in this vengeance, just a cold, dry finality that felt like nothingness. Just then, my phone vibrated quietly in my pocket. The screen showed an unlisted number. Who the hell was calling at this hour? I answered it, slightly annoyed. The voice on the other end was young and shaking, barely out of puberty. "Hello, is this General Ross?" "Who is this?" The voice stuttered again. "And my name is Private First Class Cal Peterson. I was in Sergeant Baker's company, ma'am." I sucked in a breath. Sam's colleague. A witness to that hell. "I am so sorry. I know this does not make it right, but I was such a coward." He was almost crying. For the first time in days, my heart gave a strong beat, touched by a flicker of hope. The solid wall of silence was finally beginning to crack. "PFC Peterson," I said, forcing my voice to be as gentle as I could, so I would not scare away his fragile courage. "Calm down and tell me what happened. Everything you saw and know." Encouraged by my calm tone, the young soldier started sobbing and stammered out the horrific truth of that night. It began with a minor navigation error, something trivial. But that small mistake ignited Doyle's psychotic need for control. After the exercise, Doyle dragged Sam in front of the formation and screamed, demanding she take responsibility. He ordered her to strip out of her gear, down to her underwear. When she hesitated, frozen by shame and terror, Doyle threatened to lock her up as a prisoner of war for disobeying a direct order. She had no defense. Shivering in the winter wind, she had to shed her uniform and her dignity, piece by agonizing piece. Doyle then made her hold a push-up position, in her underwear, on the cold sand. But the real hell came next. He ordered the other male Marines to form a circle around her and watch. Doyle and a handful of senior NCOs began hurling animalistic obscenities at her. Then, they took out their cell phones and started filming the whole damn thing. This was not training. This was a savage, collective sexual assault and battery. A gruesome, shared sport dedicated to humiliating and destroying a human being's identity. Sam endured it for over an hour before her body and mind gave up, and she collapsed. And this is the video they took, ma'am. I could not delete it. I am so sorry. I am truly sorry. Kyle cried, transferring the video file to my phone. I hung up the phone and stared out at the morning sea. The hot fury was gone. In its place was a chilling, sterile, murderous intent, a surgical desire to cut out the rot. I slowly walked toward Doyle, who was struggling to stay upright in the waist-deep water. I held up my phone and played the video right in front of his face. On the small screen, my granddaughter, in her underwear, was weeping, her face twisted in pain and humiliation. Doyle, is this what you call tradition? Seeing the irrefutable evidence, every drop of blood drained from his face. The video was God's thunderbolt, shattering the throne of lies he had built his whole career on. He was blue, like a corpse. His eyes were wide with terror. He tried to scramble backward, but the icy water had stolen the strength from his legs. He fell back into the waves, helpless. I did not waste another glance on him. I stood at the water's edge and called General Davies. My voice was cold as a death sentence in the morning quiet. Davies, contact the Criminal Investigation Division and every single media outlet you have an association with. Now, the media, General? His panic was obvious. To voluntarily expose military misconduct was unprecedented. Yes, television, newspapers, online media, all of them. Get as many reporters here as possible. Tell them we have animals here who need to be arrested in the act. And add this. The entire nation is invited to watch how the United States Marine Corps is reborn, right here, today, on this coastline. The order was absolute. Davies did not dare argue or hesitate. With trembling hands, he began making the calls to expose the most shameful part of the country's defense force to the light of day. In less than an hour, the Plymouth coastline transformed into a giant, open-air courtroom. The golden sunrise illuminated the beach. Every road leading to the coast was sealed off by CID vehicles. But tearing past the blockade, dozens of reporters, camera crews, and journalists, running like soldiers in battle, swarmed the sand, microphones and cameras in hand. At the eye of the frenzy and confusion, Victoria Ross stood as still and solid as a granite monument. In front of her, shivering with hypothermia, stood Master Gunnery Sergeant Thomas Doyle, dragged from the icy water. Lined up with him were the young Marines who had sold their souls through silence. Behind them, General Davies, the Chief of Staff of the Army, and the senior officers watched this nightmare with faces twisted in horror. This was not a covert internal inquiry. This was a public execution, a ritual where a legendary former general tore the deepest, darkest rot from the heart of the organization she had served and burned it for the entire nation to see. I did not need a microphone. My voice sliced through the cold morning air, powerful enough to quiet the waves of Cape Cod Bay. To Master Gunnery Sergeant Doyle, to the officers who stood by, and to every Marine here who sold his soul for silence, I swept my finger over the pathetic criminals. What is the honor of the Marine Corps? Was it not the oath to put your life on the line first to protect the American people? Was it not to become the strongest warrior so you could protect the weakest among you? I paused, the raw grief mixing with my anger. But what did you do? You used that strength to crush your own comrade, your fellow Marine, a young woman, simply to satisfy your wicked, animal lust and your pathetic dominance. Is this the spirit of the Corps you boast about? I pulled my smartphone from my pocket and connected it to a speaker system the news crews had set up. I hit play. The entire Plymouth coastline was suddenly assaulted by the horrific sounds of that night. Damn, check out the body on her. That ass is wasted on the Marines. Doyle's vile commentary and the demonic laughter of his subordinates boomed out. The audio streamed live through satellite trucks and cell phones into 100 million American homes. The public was slammed with the most shameful reality of the organization they trusted the most. This is your truth. This is the face you wanted to hide. I stopped the audio and transferred the video file to a massive monitor the press had brought. There was no blurring. The raw footage flashed onto the screen. Sam in her underwear, contorted in shame and pain, surrounded by the leering faces of Doyle and his goons. The reaction was explosive. Internet news sites crashed, phone lines at TV stations jammed, and hashtag Plymouth Judgment immediately went to the top of every trending list. General Davies could not stand. He stumbled forward, fell to his knees in front of me, and pressed his forehead to the cold sand, live on national television. General Ross, my senior, this is our sin. We bred this monster inside our ranks. On behalf of the United States Army and the nation, I offer my deepest apologies to the American people and to Sergeant Baker. Your apology is not for me. Give it to the public and to my granddaughter, I told him coldly. Then I issued my final order. Arrest every one of these beasts right now, and you will disclose the full truth of this case, from start to finish, without one single lie. If you attempt to cover this up, or make this a simple scapegoat story, I will personally tear down the Army flag and end its history. This is my final notice. The Criminal Investigation Division, CID, moved in, snapping handcuffs onto Doyle and the other perpetrators. Countless camera flashes immortalized their arrests. But I knew this was not the end. I knew this massive, corrupt snake would not die just from cutting off a few tails. That evening, back at my temporary residence, a private, classified call came in from a trusted general, a former protege. It is bad, General. His voice was urgent. The hardliners are moving to crush you. They have formally requested an investigation by the Department of Defense Inspector General, OIG, claiming you, a civilian, improperly exercised command authority and assaulted military personnel. They are trying to equate Doyle's crime with your actions, a false equivalency, to socially annihilate you. My eyes grew colder, sharper. Let them try, I whispered, looking out at the blood-red sunset over the harbor. If they want to cast me as a villain, I will gladly become the absolute evil necessary to judge every last one of them. Within the military's most powerful circles, a giant counter-reformation had begun. The man leading the charge was Lieutenant General Wayne Ashworth, a powerful figure who had always been overshadowed by me and had long nursed a deep, ugly inferiority complex. That woman, that retired hag, she thinks she can waltz in here and shred the order and tradition we built over decades. He raged to his faction. But this is our opportunity. She went too far. She broke the law and conducted private justice. We attack on that point. Their attack was swift and sly. They leaked selective information to the media, painting my forced march as cruel assault and abuse of power, twisting my image from a hero to an arrogant criminal. They then pressured the Marines present to change their stories. Did General Ross's order instill terror in you? You, too, are a victim of her assault. Tell the truth. Finally, cloaking their actions under the banner of restoring public trust, they formally requested the DoD Inspector General establish a special investigation task force into my alleged misconduct. Days later, the DoD announced the task force. The head, Lieutenant General Wayne Ashworth, lauded as a man of unimpeachable fairness. The executioner had picked up his axe. I watched the news coverage of Ashworth without expression. A farce, I thought, but I felt the public narrative subtly shifting. This was war, but I was not alone. The shockwave I sent through the system had also awakened the clean springs that lay dormant. My first visitor was former Supreme Court Chief Justice Robert "The Rock" Sterling, an 80-year-old giant of the legal world. General Ross, no, Vic. I still know the difference between right and wrong. How can I help? Next came Attorney Vanessa, the Hammer, Hale, a human rights lawyer. What you did was legally risky. But the spirit of the law is to protect the weak. I will fight by your side to protect that spirit. Finally, the renowned investigative journalist Mike, the Bulldog Rourke arrived. General Ross, you have opened a hell of a Pandora's box. My duty is to see what is left at the bottom. Let me document your fight. No, let me fight with you. In my small living room, the titans of American law, advocacy, and journalism had gathered. They became a single, formidable team, the Avengers of Justice. They immediately launched their counteroffensive. Attorney Hale began legal preparations to expose the OIG's investigation as biased. Justice Sterling wrote powerful op-eds, arguing that the true crisis was the complete moral collapse of the military's self-policing mechanism. And Rourke began secretly filming a documentary aimed at exposing the corrupt patronage network behind Ashworth's task force. Desperate, Ashworth's faction resorted to even dirtier tactics. They began digging into Sam's past, her service record, her test scores, her relationships. They wanted to find any small flaw to create the classic victim-blaming narrative. She had issues too. This was an unforgivable act, equivalent to assaulting the girl's scarred soul all over again. The showdown and the fatal evidence. Then, the summons arrived. A certified letter from the DoD Inspector General. You are hereby summoned to appear before the Special Task Force on date and time as a suspect in the abuse of authority and assault. My eyes narrowed, tracking the signature. Lieutenant General Wayne Ashworth. Ashworth, you would go this far? My voice held pity. Fine. I accept your invitation. Let us see whose neck ends up on your block. On the day of the hearing, the Pentagon was engulfed in a media frenzy. In the hearing room, Ashworth sat back, a confident smirk of a hunter on his face. The heavy door opened, and I walked in. I looked nothing like a suspect. I carried the powerful composure of a conquering general. Behind me, Attorney Hale stood guard. It has been a long time, Lieutenant General Ashworth, I said, standing in the center of the room. Your 2 stars have finally turned into 3. A big promotion. The sarcasm was obvious. Ashworth's smirk vanished. This is not a social call, MS. Ross, you are a civilian suspect who violated military regulations. Get that through your head. Suspect? Fine. I returned his challenge with a confident smile. Before your interrogation begins, this suspect has a piece of evidence I would like to submit. Attorney Hale placed a heavy file on the table in front of Ashworth with a loud thud. The cover read, Internal Investigation Report on Bribery and Fraud in Procurement involving Master Gunnery Sergeant Thomas Doyle and Senior Army Leadership. Ashworth's eyes widened, suddenly filled with genuine panic. What is this? Open it and see. I replied, my voice icy. While you were digging through my granddaughter's past, I took a small look at your footprints. My Avengers had been working nonstop. They had uncovered a devastating truth. Doyle's father was the CEO of a defense contracting firm that had received lucrative, non-competitive contracts for years. In return, he had paid massive bribes to senior Army generals. Doyle's continuous promotion, despite his misconduct, was the result of this corruption. The file contained bank records, compromising photos, and signed affidavits. And right at the top of the list of receiving generals was the familiar name, Lieutenant General Wayne Ashworth. Ashworth's hands began to shake like he had Parkinson's. His face went from white to a sickly green. It is a lie, a frame-up, malicious slander. He stammered. Slander? I gave him a cold, pitying smile. Then I suppose your friends who are being arrested by the FBI's Public Corruption Task Force right now are also victims of slander. Before I could finish, the TV in the corner cut to a breaking news alert. The FBI's Public Corruption Task Force has launched a major investigation into Army procurement fraud and just arrested 3 senior generals on bribery charges. The screen showed generals who were in on the kickbacks being escorted into the courthouse. The situation had reversed 180 degrees. I slowly rose and looked down at the shell-shocked Ashworth. You never had the authority to judge me, Ashworth. You are not a soldier protecting the nation. You are nothing but a greedy parasite feeding on taxpayer money while wearing a uniform. I walked to the door, took the massive file, and casually tossed it to investigative journalist Mike Rourke, who was watching from the hallway. Rourke, the rest is yours. Show the American people that there is still justice left in this country. The battle for the soul of the Army seemed to have ended in a single, decisive blow. But I knew this monster named corruption would not die from losing a few tails. The final, highest wall was still standing, the political establishment. My gaze drifted past the Pentagon, straight toward Capitol Hill. The fight for the Military Human Rights Reform Act was about to begin. If this bill passed, guys like Senator Malcolm Vance could no longer hide misconduct under the guise of organizational defense. My team, my Avengers, got the Military Human Rights Reform Act, MHRRA, submitted to Congress. But the bill immediately slammed into a thick, immovable granite wall, Senator Malcolm Vance. As chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, he used his absolute power to indefinitely stall the bill, claiming the committee was saturated with more vital security matters. Then, he launched a vicious media campaign, using pundits to paint the MHRRA as a soft-on-defense, left-wing proposal designed to destroy the military's ironclad chain of command. My reforms were being cast as reckless, unilateral actions that jeopardized national security. The line between right and wrong blurred again. When he realized we would not back down, Vance played a crueler, more ruthless card, a public execution designed to silence the weakest. The internal whistleblower, PFC Kyle Peterson, who had transferred the video, became a brief hero, but his reward was terrifying. Vance directly pressured the Secretary of Defense to issue a punitive transfer order. Peterson was reassigned to a remote radar station in the frozen Aleutian Islands of Alaska, a windswept posting cut off by winter storms. This was clearly vindictive payback against anyone who dared cross the institution. The young man who chose integrity was exiled to the ends of the earth, his career deliberately destroyed. The news hit my team like a physical blow. Attorney Vanessa Hale bit her lip. Mike Rourke shook his fist in fury. I stared at the screen showing Peterson's face, filled with despair and fear. A young man's future, sacrificed by the flick of a politician's wrist. Something vital burned out inside me. The last remnants of my loyalty to the institution, my sense of restraint, they turned to ash. All that remained was an absolute, merciless hatred for the rot at the very root of this country's power structure. Vance, I whispered, my voice raw. I will never forgive. I made a silent, steely decision. I would enter the viper's nest of politics and confront the system head-on. The battlefield shifted to Capitol Hill. I was scheduled to appear as a witness before the Senate Armed Services Committee hearing. Vance had no doubt he would win. The military was her home turf. Congress is mine, he thought. Here, power and numbers rule, not law or justice. He had all the tools to make the old idealist a national joke. The hearing day arrived, but I was not at the witness table. I was sitting in the front row of the public gallery, like a stern spectator judging a theatrical performance. As chairman, Vance took control, predictably steering the discussion away from the MHRRA toward peripheral topics, a transparent stalling tactic to run out the clock and kill the bill through inaction. When the clock struck 10 p.m., Vance yawned elaborately. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the debate has been passionate. My apologies to General Ross, but time has run out for the day. We will hear opinions on the MHRRA another time. Chairman Vance. A voice, sharp as glass, sliced through the quiet room. It was me, rising slowly from my seat in the public section. Every camera, every eye, locked onto me. Who gave you the authority to say another time for a bill stained with the blood and tears of the American people? Vance's face turned a dark red with fury and shock. What is this outrage? Observers are not permitted to speak. Guards, remove that old woman. As aides rushed toward me, I stopped them with a chilling command. Before you touch me, go study the meaning of the emblem behind the speaker's desk. I walked, splitting the aides like Moses parting the Red Sea, straight past the witness seat and onto the platform used for sworn testimony. In my hand was another, even thicker file. I am not standing here today as a mere witness, but as a prosecutor. My voice echoed without a microphone. I stand here to formally charge Chairman Malcolm Vance, before the entire nation, as a corrupt politician guilty of treasonous crimes against the state, having enriched himself by compromising the safety and lives of the American people. With that declaration, I raised the file high above my head. The cover read, Investigative Report on Long-Term Collusion and Illegal Contributions between Chairman Malcolm Vance and Defense Contractors. Sweat was pouring from Vance's forehead. The room was no longer a hearing. It was the final, high-stakes battleground for the soul of the nation. Chairman Vance has approved dozens of opaque, sole source contracts for specific defense firms over the last decade. In exchange, his son's shell consulting company has received millions of dollars in advisory fees. This file contains the bank transaction records, I stated, my voice devoid of emotion. I laid out the proof, the perfect checkmate. But I did not stop there. I went for the jugular. These fraudulent contracts led to the delivery of substandard equipment. Young servicemen and women died or were grievously injured in training accidents directly caused by these defective products. Your greed, Senator Vance, murdered the young people you swore to protect. My words, broadcast live, pierced the heart of the nation. This was not just corruption. It was treason against those who sacrificed their lives. The public outrage boiled over. Tens of thousands of citizens spontaneously gathered outside Capitol Hill, surrounding the building like a galaxy, chanting, "Throw Vance out. Pass the MHRRA now." Faced with this tsunami of public will, Vance's party leadership cut him loose. They advised him to resign immediately, the effective end of his political career. Stripped of all support, Vance attempted a final, ugly resistance. He mobilized a few loyalists to launch a filibuster to run out the clock on the congressional session. Time was running out. Everyone assumed the bill was dead. Then, with just an hour left in the session, an old, respected figure slowly walked to the podium. Senator Frank Caldwell, a conservative war hawk who had initially criticized my actions. Everyone assumed he would join the filibuster. Instead, he placed his prepared notes aside, faced the gallery, and bowed deeply. "I am ashamed," he declared, his voice trembling. "I stand here today not just as a politician, but as a soldier who once dedicated his life to this country. And for the first time, I am ashamed to have worn the uniform. We should have protected the lives and dignity of our young troops. This bill, the MHRRA, is our last chance to restore our honor." He slammed his fist on the podium. "I can no longer participate in this shameful history. I abandon this filibuster and cast my vote in favor of the MHRRA." His cry of conscience was a shockwave. Other guilt-ridden members stood up and applauded. Vance's desperate resistance had collapsed in the most dramatic way possible. The vote was called immediately. The display board lit up with an overwhelming number of green yes lights. The bill is passed. The MHRRA is hereby enacted. The speaker's gavel cracked down. Outside, a roar of celebration erupted, a joyous anthem heralding the end of a long, dark night. In the gallery, I quietly closed my eyes. A hot tear traced a path down the etched lines of my cheek, a blend of lifelong anger, sorrow, and hard-won victory. When I opened my eyes, my granddaughter, Sam, who had quietly joined me, reached out and gently squeezed my hand. The political storm had passed. The corruption of Vance and Ashworth was purged. The MHRRA was immediately enacted, establishing the Independent National Defense Integrity Commission. My home in Boston returned to its quiet routine. The anger and overwhelming sense of responsibility that had dominated my life were gone, replaced by a deep, quiet stillness. Sam was staying with me, healing her wounds. One evening, sitting on the terrace, she broke the silence. "Grandmother, I am going back to the Marines." I was not surprised. Why return to that hell? Sam looked up, her eyes shining with fierce clarity. "Because I refuse to run," she said firmly. "If I quit now, Doyle and Vance win. They are gone, but the ghost of their corrupt dominance is still lurking in the unit. Someone has to stay and fight that ghost. You taught me that the world can be changed. I will go back. I will become the shield that I never had, so no junior troop ever has to feel the pain I did." She smiled faintly. "I am going to become the true elite Marine that I always wanted to be, but was forbidden from becoming." I took her hand in mine, wrapping it gently with my scarred fingers. "If that is your path, I will believe in you and support you. But remember this, the true meaning of the saying, 'Once a Marine, always a Marine,' is not to suffer alone. It means to share the hardship and be a shield for each other. You are going back to prove the true meaning of that code." Days later, Sam was back in her uniform. Before she passed through the base gate, she turned and gave me the most powerful salute I had ever received. She was no longer a victim. She was a true commander, ready to take responsibility for her chosen path. That summer, a letter arrived from Sam. It was not the dry, dutiful letter of the past. "Grandmother, are you well? The summer ocean here is the strongest and bluest I have ever seen. It is strange. The waves that felt so cold before do not feel cold now. They feel like a reliable comrade pushing me forward. I started a human rights reading group with the junior troops. I believe this small wave of change will eventually become a strong tide. You taught me what true courage is. I held the letter to my chest. Outside, the Boston harbor shimmered under the summer sun, wide and endless. The final, legendary battle was over. But the small ripple of hope created by one person's courage had just begun its journey into the wider ocean. I smiled deeply toward the blue expanse. The sound of war was gone. In its place, the gentle, powerful rhythm of a new era was finally washing ashore.